there, fellow classic comic collectors. As always, I'm Scott Harris King, and today I'm here to answer all of your questions in this special 400 subscriber Ask Me Anything. As always, I first want to thank you for all the support. Getting to 400 subscribers is crazy. I never expected to get this many subscribers, so thank you to everybody who subscribed and continues to watch this stuff, and thanks for all your questions. I've got 400 questions lined up. Well, no, wait. Okay, there aren't that many questions. But there's a lot of questions. I'm going to answer them in my usual incredibly long-winded way, so this video may be very long. I'm also going to be recording it in segments right now. This is the lying down segment, which, as you can see from the quality of this video, I'm also recording this on a potato. But that's just the way it goes sometimes. I've just been on my feet a little too much recently, so it's time to relax, kick back with a big pile of questions from you guys. So let's jump right into it. I'm going to answer these in the order they were asked, and we're going to start off with the Gray Man. Thank you so much for all your support, Gray Man. I really appreciate it. The Gray Man asks, my question is, what is the saddest or wackiest romance story you have read? So there are a lot of sad romance stories. You know, I have, of course, this series that I've been doing on my channel here about the Vietnam issues and how romance comics handle the Vietnam War. And some of those are actually quite sad. There's a lot of them that deal with the soldier dying and then their wife or girlfriend mourning them and moving on or not moving on. So some of those are quite sad. Some of them also deal with post-traumatic stress and can be quite sad. So I would say probably one of those. Sweethearts 115 is a good one. In terms of wackiest, there's so many wacky romance stories. It's really hard to narrow it down. There's a story in Young Love 126, which I did a whole video on, which I'm a huge fan of that issue. All the stories in that issue, but one in particular where a girl falls in love with a race car driver, and the mother doesn't want her to because her husband, the girl's father, was also a race car driver and was killed in a terrible car accident and in a race. And then at the end, the girl is so love struck that she somehow wanders onto the track in the middle of a race. Her boyfriend has to wipe the car out, and when he does, there's a guy in pit row who gets bonked on the head. And it turns out it's the dad, and he had amnesia from the accident and has been just sort of hanging around in plain sight for the last 20 years or whatever. So that one is hilarious. There's a lot of really goofy ones. There's one, Charlton's mostly, but there's another one that I really like. I forget the issue number, where this girl is bemoaning her bad luck and how all of her boyfriends have something bad happen to them, and one of the boyfriends, where they have a flashback, is a guy who went swimming. He didn't wait an hour after dinner to go swimming, and he cramped up and drowned in the lake. So those are a couple of the wacky ones that come to mind immediately. Thanks again for the question, Gray Man. Dratcheers Comics and Things. Richard, thanks very much. I really appreciate it. It was your post on the CGC forums last year that got me doing videos to begin with, your top 50 video. So I appreciate it very much. Okay, here's a question. You have to pick 5 comics in your collection to save. The rest are disappearing. Do you go for valuable books, or the ones you've had a hard time replacing because of scarcity, or sentimental? Bonus points for going to specific examples. Well, I can tell you exactly which ones that I would get, because these are the books that would be my current top 5 books in my collection, and most of them are both valuable and sentimental and scarce. So they check all the boxes, and those issues would be Avengers #1, I've talked about most of these in my previous top 50, but Avengers #1, which I have signed by Stan Lee, and my parents got me for my 14th birthday, and there's a lot more stories that I have associated with it, particularly being given the title of Fearless Front Facer by Stan Lee for choosing to get my Avengers 1 instead of a car for my birthday. So Avengers 1, Avengers 4, which is a really beat up copy, and it was one of the first back issues I got, and it has a lot of sentimental meaning for me. My dad bought it for me. We were at a comic store. It was $12.50, and it was so beat up that I was worried that the cover would rip or come off while I was reading it because it was split, spine split. So we rubber cemented the cover to the spine. I don't recommend doing that, but that just has a lot of sentimental value because of my dad. And the same for Gru #1, the epic Gru. And I've told the story before, but when I was a kid, my dad read comics when he was in the 60s, when he was in high school and he was in Vietnam. And when I started reading comics as a kid, Gru was one where I showed it to my dad after I read it because I was really laughing a lot, and he really liked it. And so for 10 years I bought all 120 issues of that series as they came out, and every time I would read the new issue of Gru, I'd give it to my dad and he would read it. So my Gru #1 is the one I still have, the one that I bought off the stands in 1985. It's really low grade. I now have it signed and remarked by both Sergio Aragonés and Stan Sakai. I just need to meet Mark Evanier, which I really hope to do at some point, to get his signature. And the other ones would be Boy Comics #3, the first issue of that series. It's also the first appearance of Crime Buster, one of my favorite characters, a Golden Age classic, and it was also a birthday present from my wife, so it has sentimental value as well. And then finally, Albedo #2, the first appearance of Usagi Yojimbo, which I just got last year. It's a book that I don't think I could replace. I could theoretically replace it because I do have insurance in my comics, so if there's a fire or something, I could use part of my insurance money to buy a new copy of that, but frankly it would cost so much to replace it that I'm not sure I'd want to do that. So I think those would be my 5. The first 4 for sure, and I think the Albedo 2, because of the scarcity, would be my number 5. Those would also be my top 5 comics in my collection in that same order. So thanks very much for the question. I really appreciate it. So let's continue on here. Silver Knight Kyle, thank you, Kyle. Subscriber number 50. You've obviously met many legendary writers and artists and cons over the years, which is true. I have a couple hundred signatures now, at least. What were some of my favorite meet and greets, exchanges, how do you do's over the years, and maybe even a few surprise letdowns? Really good question. I mean, human nature, the situations that I was let down or frustrated are the ones that come to mind first. And it wasn't even, in some cases, really the creator so much as it just, like, when I met Mark Teixeira, he was being so generous that he was doing free remarks. He was doing little head sketches and stuff in the book. The guy in front of me had a pile of 40 comics, and he did the sketch on every single one of them, and I had to wait like an hour while he did that. That's just not good convention etiquette, and I was a little frustrated that he didn't make that guy wait to get his pile done when he was really asking way too much of the creators. Some of my favorites, I mean, this is more of a general thing, but my rules when I bring stuff to get signed are, I've mentioned some of this before, but if they worked on Avengers, I always bring something from Avengers, particularly if they worked on the title Avengers itself. but also, if they did something with the team, I'll do that as well. And so I have, a complete run of Avengers. I have a lot of them assigned at this point. I mean, not even half of them, but like I've got 50 or 60 issues of Avengers signed by all sorts of different creators. Many of whom I didn't even know worked on Avengers. But I also, I have specific interests. I like a lot of offbeat, weird things. And so a lot of times my favorite interactions really are bringing books in that the creators aren't expecting, because nobody ever brings them that stuff. When I met Chris Claremont, everybody in line had all of these X-Men comics. The two things that I had him sign was Avengers Annual 10, the first appearance of Rogue, but the other one I really wanted a signature on was War is Hell #9, the first appearance of John Kowalski, because that's a great series, and he was flummoxed that I had brought that in, and I've had a number of creators where they leafed through the book because they haven't seen it in so long that a lot of times they'd forgotten they did it. Amanda Connor, I had her sign. She had done forget who the character was. I think it was Captain Marvel, actually. Monica Rambeau. She had, or either that or Yellow Jacket, maybe the female Yellow Jacket. She had done a story in Solo Avengers. She had no memory of doing that. I met Alan Bellman, one of the Golden Age Timely artists, and I brought him 2 issues of Man comics to draw. He had no idea that he had done them. That was funny, because I asked him, like, he asked me if he had drawn them, and I was like, I looked at your checklist on your website on alanbellman.com to figure out if I had any of your books. I was like, as far as your website says you drew it, I don't have any idea. He looked through it and he said he didn't recognize any of his work, but he signed it anyway. Although he asked me to I had to buy something from him before he signed it, so I do have a signed print from him. So, and of course there's some creators that I know a little bit from online interactions or various places, like Kurt Busiek. Was great to finally meet Kurt after interacting online for decades. So I guess hopefully I answered your questions. I sometimes cosplay as Crime Buster, and the only creator who recognized me was Mark Waid. That's not entirely true, but it's almost true. Mark Waid, Roy Thomas, and I think Kurt Busiek also recognized me, but for many years it was just Mark Waid was the only creator who recognized me. Eric Larson figured it out eventually, but Mark Waid had to give him some hints. Anyway, rambled on a long time there. Thanks for the questions, Kyle. Let's go. Metarog here. Next question. How do you store and organize your comics? I have drawer boxes. So when I moved into, not this place, but the previous place, I had bought a house in 2012, I want to say. I replaced all of my comic boxes during the move. I spent hundreds of dollars on drawer boxes. So I have a wall, and then inside my closet I have a second wall of drawer boxes, so they're all on top of each other and you can pull them out like file cabinet drawers. But they're boxes stacked on top of each other, so you can also move them around if you wanted to, but you don't really need to, because if you really want to, you can just take the interior box out of 2 of them and then rearrange them. So that's what I usually do if I need to rearrange things. Then I have them organized. It changes from time to time, but I try and keep things clumped together. So I've got like Avengers Box 1, Avengers Box 2, Avengers Box 3. I've got Captain America 1 and 2 and 3. I've got like miscellaneous Archie, and then like Life with Archie 1, Life with Archie 2, Jughead 1, 2, 3, Archie 1, 2, 3, and then I've got like DC Romance 1, 2, 3, Charlton 1, 2, Miscellaneous Romance, which has all the Atlas stuff and miscellaneous things. And then I keep things near it that are thematically similar, so like my box of Lois Lane is next to the romance. But the drawer boxes is the big thing. You know, I realized I was just getting too old it was just too big of a hassle. I wanted to be able to access my comics easily without moving the stuff around, and the drawer boxes have really worked out great. I've had them for 9 years now, and they've held up, and it was a big expenditure to switch over, but it was worth it. Thanks for the question, Roger. I appreciate it. Keith Ingebretson. Hi, Keith. Thanks very much for your question. Do you collect any of the Charlton horror comics? And if so, what is your favorite title? So, he says he collects Ghost Manor. The answer is I don't collect them. Horror comics I'm not a big fan of. I just don't like horror in general. I don't like horror movies. I don't like horror stories. I don't like horror comics. I do have a small collection of horror comics anyway, because some of the covers are really cool, and I do have some Charlton, a few Charlton horror books because the covers are cool, or someone gave them to me, or I found them cheap, or something like that. So I have a small collection of horror comics, but I don't really collect them, other than Haunted Love, which of course they're gothic horror romance. So I have most of that run. I haven't finished it, but I have most of the run of Haunted Love. There are individual issues of certain Charlton horror books that I would like to get because of the cool covers. But no, I don't collect that. Thanks for the question. K. Titus says, what is the one comic you really want to collect? There's two questions, so let's start with that. What is the one comic you really want to collect? Well, I have complete runs of most of the titles that I collect, with the exception of the romance books. So I'm gonna just assume that you mean that I'm not already collecting. I mean, if I could complete a run of one of the books that I'm currently working on that's not done, it would be a really tough decision. It might be young romance, but I'd have to think about it. Of the books that I don't currently collect, which one would I want to collect? If I'm not currently collecting it, it's because it's too expensive. There's titles that I've put together almost complete runs of before and then given up on them for one reason or another, or just realized I didn't care that much. You know, I was only missing 4 issues for a complete run of Thor / Journey into Mystery. When I sold off most of those, I had almost 200 issues of Sergeant Rock before I gave up on that run. I just didn't love it enough. Same with like GI Combat. I think I've had over 100 issues of that, and I got rid of them because I just actually don't like them that much. X-Men is something where, you know, I had almost the full run of the new X-Men, and I got rid of those. So it would be a golden age. I mean, if I had an unlimited amount of money, I would love to collect the Golden Age Captain America because I like the character. Golden Age Sensation Comics and Wonder Woman. The one that I've considered getting into, which would be very expensive but just theoretically possible, is Lev Gleason's Daredevil. I'm a big fan, obviously, of Boy Comics. I do have a few issues of Daredevil. I think they're really good. I like the Little Wise Guys stories. They're really good. The ones that I've read, anyway. So that is something I've considered doing, and that's something where I could get the last 85 issues or so without spending too much money. The first 50 issues, though, would be an outlay. So that would probably be my answer. I do know someone who has a complete run of Lev Gleason Daredevil. I'll just leave it at that. I'm hoping to convince him to come on the channel here and share it, but I can't promise anything. Second question: what comic do you think was the worst comic, either story-wise or drawing-wise? I mean, there's a lot of really badly drawn comics and really badly written comics. You know, there's comics that I found like bad and kind of offensive ways. The story that John Byrne wrote, where Superman and Big Barda make a porno, I thought was really unnecessary, particularly since it seemed to be part of a feud between Byrne and Kirby, knowing that Big Barda was based on Kirby's wife Roz. So I find that issue to be really unnecessary. There's some stories drawing wise that are just bad. Like there's an issue of Captain America, I want to say it's 355. They were publishing bi-weekly, and the artists just could not keep up with a bi-weekly schedule, and who can blame them? And so basically Al Milgrom had to draw the entire comic in like 3 days, and I'm not a big fan of Al Milgrom's art to begin with, but it looks like it was drawn in 3 days. Like, it's bad. But honestly, the comic that I really thought was the worst in terms of my reading experience was New Avengers 16. It sucks so bad that, you know, I have a full run of Avengers, 502 issues. I bought New Avengers when it relaunched up to issue 23. And so of those 525 issues or so, New Avengers 16 is the worst. The worst issue of Avengers of all time, at least of the ones that I've read. It's... The Avengers don't appear in it. It's a prologue for a story arc. And it's just a bunch of agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. watching monitors going, oh my god, something's coming at the planet from outer space. And just talking about it. And then, it, like, on the monitor they see it, like, crash into Canada. And, like, between panels, Alpha Flight is supposedly killed. They don't even show that. And it was just so bad. It was like, in terms of the decompression, this decompressed storytelling and this cinematic storytelling and writing for the trade, it's the worst I've ever seen, because nothing happened in it. I finished reading that and I thought to myself, the setup of this is almost the same as Avengers 102, which is where the Sentinels returned from the sun, because this was someone coming out of the sun and crashing into the earth. In Avengers 102, the Sentinels come out of the sun and crash into the earth. And the notoriously long-winded Roy Thomas took 3 pages to do that. And then he got to the actual story. But no, this was an entire issue that was the only thing that happened was some kind of alien crashed into the planet, and at the end of the issue they call the Avengers. It was garbage. It's offensive. It's stealing my money, and I have to say, the rest of that arc, incredibly bad. That was an arc that only made sense if you had read a specific run of X-Men, which I hadn't read, and which they didn't explain. And so there's this huge reveal that this character is someone named Zorn, and it's like supposed to be this amazing, shocking reveal, and I was like, who the freak is that? There's no setup, and there's no explanation, and then there's like, it's the arc where Vision returns to the team after being destroyed in Avengers 502 or 501 or whatever, and he's just sort of there in the background, and when they have these big fight scenes, and he's not in any of the panels, and he's doesn't have any dialogue. He just goes on the mission with them and disappears and serves no purpose, and he's just there to be there in the background of like a couple panels. And I don't know, it's just so bad. The people that are fans of Brian Michael Bendis, I don't get it. I don't get it. Everyone kept saying how great his stuff was going to be, and I had to give it time. I read over 2 years of his series. He had no idea what he was doing. Every one of his arcs was hot trash. Anyway, I try not to be negative on this channel, so I don't want to talk about it anymore, but that was the worst thing I've ever read. Okay, James Gallegos. Thanks very much for the question, James, and the support. I appreciate it. James says, my guilty... aside from romance books, what is the title or genre of comics that is the top of my list? Well, I'm a big fan of Archie. So I've got Jughead 85 and up. And that's a series that ran, if you combine the various titles, it ran for, I want to say 580 issues. So I've got almost 500 straight issues of Jughead. And I've got more than that almost of Archie. I'm missing just issue 511 to have 156 and up to 713. That'll be the longest run that I have, because my Avengers run is 502 issues. That one's even longer. So I'm a big Archie fan. But I'm also a big fan of certain war comics. I just mentioned that I got rid of very large collections of Sergeant Rock and of GI Combat, but I've got a sort of a complete run of Sergeant Fury. I say sort of because I have all the new stories in Sergeant Fury. Around issue 81, they started alternating reprints with new issues, and then with issue 121, they went to full reprints. I don't have the reprints. So if you look at my checklist, there's issues missing because they're reprints. But I've got a complete run of Sergeant Fury. I've got a complete run of Unknown Soldier. I've got a complete run of The Losers. I've got several smaller runs, some of which like I'm either got rid of or I'm getting rid of. Things like Captain Savage's Leatherneck Raiders. I've got a complete run of like Combat Kelly, the 70s version. A lot of smaller things. But I'm a big fan of. I've got a lot of issues of Weird War, and I'm debating whether or not to finish that series. I haven't really read them, but I know that I'll like them because I do like the war stuff. But yeah, I say War and Archie, about as opposite as you can get. Thanks for the question. Andrew Kai says, what is my favorite moment or moments in a comic book story? He's got two questions, so here's question one. What is my favorite moment or moments so far in a comic book story? Good question. Favorite moments. As a kid, the moments that I really remember were things like in Avengers 274, when the Masters of Evil take over the mansion and they almost beat Hercules to death. There's a cliffhanger at the end of that issue where you wonder if Hercules has been killed. That one really shocked me. There's some really cool moments in Kurt Busiek's Avengers run as well that I really liked. The famous panel where the Avengers smash through the wall to confront Ultron. Avengers 161, the last page where Jarvis comes in to Avengers Mansion and finds all the Avengers dead. There's some real like shocking moments. Some great cliffhanger moments. I'm trying to think of some like moments that had me cheering. but I can just think of the real shocking moments, like the end of Secret Wars 11, where Doctor Doom kills all the Marvel heroes. Yeah, I guess those are the moments. I would call those are some of my favorite moments that immediately come to mind. Second question: what is your favorite animated cartoon, if any? I don't really watch cartoons that much. I say that. I mean, I have in the past. When I was a kid, of course, I watched a lot of cartoons, and then I watched. I'm not counting Disney cartoons here, and then for a while in the 2000s, I watched a lot of Adult Swim. So a lot of anime stuff like Full Metal Alchemist and things like that. My favorite cartoon, though, was from when I was a kid, is Star Blazers, aka Space Battleship Yamato. Star Blazers is had a big impact on me as a kid. I absolutely loved it. Really formative. It was so different from the American cartoons, and going from that, I saw that in 81. I want to say 80, 81. And so then a couple years later, we're getting, in American cartoons, we're getting G.I. Joe and Transformers. And the original miniseries of both of those are good. They're quite good. But then they seem so juvenile. It's like I was 3 years older, and the content was just so juvenile compared to something like Star Blazers, where you had characters making really interesting moral decisions, and a lot of gray characters, and characters getting killed, characters that were running through the whole series and getting killed. And so American cartoons just seemed childish and dumb compared to Star Blazers. So that would be my choice. Thanks for the questions, Andrew. Cat fan, comics man. Here we go. The question is, how do you organize your comics? Question, well, I answered that already from Metarog. I have the drawer boxes. But there's a second question from Cat fan, comics man. How do you find the best prices online? He doesn't have a local LCS within 100 miles. Honestly, I just buy almost everything on eBay now. Sometimes I have to wait. Sometimes when I don't wait, I make mistakes, like that Archie 321 I bought that was missing the panels. But that's about it. I don't really use anything else online. I got burnt the one time I tried to do an auction from Heritage, I think it was. That did not work out. I've heard people have had some success with Comic Connect. I haven't really used it. Those would tend to be places where I get the higher end stuff. I used to use my comic shop for a lot of things. They have a lot of, if you're into superhero books, they have a lot of things at good prices. If you don't mind mid-grade stuff, they notoriously undergrade books. They have a lot of books like that they grade at a 4.5 and they're really a 6, stuff like that. So in the middle grades, you can get a lot of good deals, and the prices, I think, are reasonable. I will say, though, a couple things that their pricing for romance stuff has gone crazy recently. They've noticed some of the old stuff really being valuable now, and they've just priced, if you want any issue of any ACG romance book in any condition, they're $40, $50, $60. They're crazy. It's crazy amounts of and all of their old romance from the 50s, it's all insanely overpriced. So I find that their reasonable pricing does not apply to some of the places that I collect. The other thing is, I've chosen not to support them any longer, because the guy who runs my comic shop in Lone Star Comics, I guess he puts out a newsletter, which I haven't been receiving, but it's come to my attention that in the newsletter he puts out a lot of sort of right-wing political opinions, And that certainly his right to do that, but he's basically using a platform that I'm paying for to distribute his political stuff, and since I don't really agree with most of what I've read of his opinions, I've decided to withdraw that financial support. That's a situation where he's decided to use his platform for that, and that's fine. I just don't want to be part of building that platform, so I've chosen not to support his my comic shop anymore, and that has reduced my avenues of buying comics online. So thanks for the questions. Bradford Dillman, my question: what is the first comic that got you into romance comics? I don't remember the first ones I've bought, but I've mentioned this in a couple other videos. Young Love 104 is really the one that put me over the top. I was reading a different romance book, one of the handful of issues that I had purchased, and there was a house ad in it for Young Love 104, and this was in 2008, maybe 2009. I want to say 2009. And it's got the story, full length story, which is unusual for romance, but a full issue called Veil of Love, where a guy falls in love with a nun. That's what's on the cover, and I was like, I have to own this. And my comic shop actually had a really nice copy that I paid $9 for, and the story was even better than I could possibly have imagined. Robert Conagher at his absolute finest. Post-traumatic stress, Vietnam vet falling in love with a nun, and it's got all sorts of crazy stuff in it, and it was just like everything a romance comic could be and so much more. And that's the one where I was like, okay, I've got to get a lot more of these. So that was it. Mark Spector Comics, thanks for the support. Mark Spector Comics, I appreciate it. Question: what are your favorite romance golden age artists? So, I hate to be basic, but Matt Baker, some great covers. Vince Colletta, absolutely fantastic. There's times when I can't really. His work is so close to Baker's in terms of the men's faces in particular. Sometimes hard to tell who's who on some of those covers, but great artist. There's some great Atlas covers, by J. Scott Pike. But also, and if you're not into romance, this might shock some of you, but even more than Vince Colletta. Well, nothing's quite that shocking. But Al Hartley, who we've talked about recently, is he's most famous for doing the Spire line of Christian Archie comics. But he worked at Atlas for a long time. Before he went to Archie, he was the artist on Patsy Walker for a long time. And Al Hartley did some romance books in the 50s with some fantastic covers. Just great stuff you would not expect from him. So those are some of the people I look for. I haven't really gotten into collecting Atlas romance because they seem hard to find in decent condition. The few that I've had, I've sold, and I sort of regret it, but it's just they're harder to find in decent shape than DC's. Maybe not as hard as Charlton's, but those are some of the artists. There's some other Charlton artists that I like from the late 50s, but there's some really more Silver Age stuff. So, thanks for the question. Mark B. What's your best find at a flea market? Well, I did a video about my dollar bin stuff, and of course I've talked some about this in my trading challenge, because that's part of the reason I did that, is because I have had a lot of success finding books cheap, and I love looking for them. And a lot of times I'll find cool stuff that not part of my collection, my collecting things, so I'll sell them. So I figured, why not trade them and try and trade up for something I want, like the first appearance of Wonder Woman. So I'm going to break this down into 3 different types of flea markets. Actual, like traditional outdoor flea markets. And then there's indoor flea markets, which are the same thing up here in New England. It's just that because the weather's so bad, there's places that they do these flea markets inside, like giant warehouses, so you can have them during the winter. And then there's a different kind of indoor flea markets, which are actually, like, they're open all the time. They're more like antique stores, but they have the stalls, where it'll be like, say, a barn, and they'll have like 40 or 60 stalls marked out, and each one is like the collection of a different vendor who's selling yard sales or flea market stuff. So, and I've had success at all 3. So in terms of traditional flea markets, I actually don't go to very many, because as much as I love them, I just don't like getting up in the morning. But I've had some success. Brimfield Antique Show, which is a giant flea market in Brimfield, Mass. When I was a kid in the late 80s, I got a Sergeant Fury #1 there for $20. Wasn't that big of a, it wasn't that great of a deal at the time. That was the going rate, really. But it was a cool find, and of course I got rid of it very soon. I wish I hadn't. I have another copy now, but that one cost me a lot more. But recently at Brimfield, just a couple years ago, I got a copy of the 50s anti-communist propaganda comic, Is This Tomorrow, which shows like a nuclear holocaust cover, and I got that for $10. It's not really my collecting focus. I flipped it for a nice profit, but that was a really cool find. It wasn't even from a comic vendor. It was someone that was selling a bunch of ephemera and paper goods, and it was in the middle of that. So that's how I found it. In terms of indoor flea markets, I've probably had my best success at indoor flea markets. Like there was one time I was at a show and I got a bunch of stuff, and I don't remember all of it. I know everything was $1. I got an Alias #1. They had a Knights of the Dinner Table 4 and 5, and I got a couple other things. Probably my best from an indoor flea market was Batman Adventures 12 that I got for $1. That was the first Harley Quinn. And then for the other type of indoor flea market, which are really the antiques, they're like flea markets that run more like an antique store, but that they run all the time. I've gotten some really good stuff. I got a nice mid-grade Marvel Premiere 15 a few years ago for $2. I got an X-Men 99 really beat up for 50 cents that I actually sent someone in a mystery box a while ago. And in my current round of my trading challenge, I had just added an X-Men 129, first Kitty Pryde, first Emma Frost, which I got for 50 cents at one of those indoor flea markets, in one of those antique stalls. So I've had a lot of luck. But I also go to a lot of these places because I really enjoy it. So that was a long-winded answer, but hopefully that answered your question. MRP, here we go. What is your favorite obscure comic from the black and white boom bust of the 80s? It's really tricky. I have a lot of these and I find them really interesting, but I can't say that I'm like that into any of them specifically. The one that comes to mind is actually from the 90s, and it's Tales of Wonder, which is Bible stories drawn in a super exaggerated Kirby-esque, like, but 90s style, but with like fake ads and stuff, as though it was a 60s Marvel book. That's probably it's just so crazy that I'm enthralled by it. But that's later. That's from the early '90s, even though it's black and white. Um, there's some that I have like soft spots for because I saw them when I was a kid. Dungeoneers is not good, but I remember enjoying it as a kid. It was one of the first time I went to a comic store. They had like a quarter box, and I got a bunch of stuff. That was one of them. There was also uh, my LCS. The guy who founded my LCS, when he was a kid in the '60s, would make his own comics, and he had a character called Insect Man, and he kept doing the strip. And then by the '80s, 20 years later, when I was getting into comics, he had writers and artists that were putting them out like little mini comics, little black and white mini comics. It's called Insect Man, and they were like 30 cents cover price, because they were just like 10 or 12 pages, like half size, photocopied black and white comics. And I got one of those. I got like issue like 103 or something, and that made a big impression on me in terms of that you didn't have to be Marvel or DC. You could just make this stuff yourself. So that's something I have a soft spot for. In the early '90s, I actually drew an Insect Man story for him and for the comic store, but I don't think they ever published it. They were doing some sort of ambitious crossover with another like self-published mini zine sort of thing, and I don't know what happened, but I never heard anything about it after I turned in my pages. Related, for the contemporary area, aside from my own books, what's my favorite comic I've read that I acquired via supporting it on Kickstarter? This is a great question, because I have a lot, and I have a bunch that I haven't actually received yet, because I bought a whole bunch a couple months ago. But let me go right into my backed projects and actually look at these right now. Because I think my answer is going to change. There's a couple things I'm waiting for that I really think are going to be cool when I get them. But let me just back up here. The first year or so I was doing this stuff on Kickstarter, I was doing a lot of digital. So I have all these PDFs, and I realize I just haven't read a lot of them. Because I just don't like reading PDFs. So I'm trying to find some of the ones that I got physical copies of that I actually read. Yeah, I don't remember backing half of these. Camp Bitter Lake was cool. The Dunwich Boys, those are titles that are similar to my series of Crime Busters. They're sort of young detectives. Miskatonic High, again, I've talked about it before, same sort of thing. I like the Sentinels. Boston Powers is an anthology that I contributed to, and I really dig that. There's an anthology, sci-fi anthology, that's a trade called Maybe Someday, and they had a previous one called All We Ever Wanted, and that's what they call solar punk. They're all like sci-fi stories, but looking towards a positive future. So I like those. But actually, like, I've got something on the way called Dias de Consuelo, and I'll be showing that when I get it in one of my haul videos. But it's this guy self-published this comic. It's a black and white comic that's sort of like a... It's a story about his grandparents during the Mexican Revolution and how they ended up coming to America as a result of the Mexican, not revolution. Yes, the Mexican Revolution, the Civil War was what I mean, in 1915. And I met him at Mice like 3 years ago now, and I got the first issue of the series at a floppy, and when I got home and read it, I thought it was great. The writing was great. The art was okay. But I've seen his stuff since, and his art definitely has gotten better. And just recently, he did a trade of the whole story. And so I backed that on Kickstarter, and I haven't received it yet. I think they're mailing them out next month. But I have a very strong suspicion that once I receive Dias de Consuelo, that's going to be my favorite thing I've gotten off of Kickstarter. Yeah, because I've read the first issue and I really liked it a lot. So, hope that answered you there. Alright, thanks for the question. Here we go. Las Cruces, 1971. My question is signatures on the cover or the splash page? And my answer is depends. My feelings on this have changed over the years. When I was a kid, it was standard to have them sign on the inside of the book. At some point, it sort of shifted to having it on the cover, which makes sense because you can see it just by looking at it, right? Instead of having to take it out of the bag and open it up, it's right on the front. And particularly with CGC and encapsulated books where you can't even open it to see it, you want to have it on the cover. My copy of Avengers #1, I have it signed on the inside, and now it's in a slab and I can't see it. Now, I took photos of it before I sent it in, so I can look at that, but it's not quite the same. So there came a point where I started having everybody sign on the front cover, but I've started shifting back. And for me, it depends on the comic. I don't like having valuable books that are in nice condition signed on the cover. There's a certain point where I feel like it does become sort of almost defacing the book in a way. And I love having stuff signed, but I wouldn't have anyone sign a really high grade copy of something that's nice. Or valuable or old. So I tend to, if I have something that, the way I do it is, I'll bring them something. If it's something old, it's beat up. If it's something new and it's not valuable, then it's okay if it's nice. So I try to still have them sign on the cover by bringing them stuff where it doesn't matter if someone's name is written on the cover. But if I was going to have them sign something valuable for some reason, I would have them sign it on the inside, because I don't really like... when I went to see Jim Steranko, I had with me my Captain America 111, which is probably about an 8. A little hard to say because it's a little off color. But let's call it an 8. And then while I was in line, I decided I didn't want him to sign it because I didn't want him to write on the cover, and that was a moment where I was like, what exactly am I doing here? So it just depends on the book for me, but I'm leaning more and more towards having it signed on the inside. Okay, Earl Maltby III. 2 questions. What modern event would you make into a comic? I guess it depends first what you mean by modern, because there's been some great comics about events that happened during my lifetime. Persepolis, about the Iranian Revolution, is excellent. and I'm sure people have done excellent comics about like Chernobyl. I know that there's some really good comics about the war in Kosovo. So it's tough. The stuff that makes really dramatic comics are not necessarily things that I want to relive in comic form. That's just the way I am. Like, I think you could do a good moving comic about like the Challenger disaster or something, but I wouldn't want to read it. I know people have done comics about 9/11. I wouldn't want to read that either. It's just, yeah, it's just not how I process those things, and I just don't want to revisit them. So it would be difficult for me really to think of something, a modern event that I would want to make into a comic, because the stuff that's the most dramatic and big, that's sort of the most obvious things, are things that I wouldn't want to read a comic about. Yeah, it would need to be something uplifting for me, like sort of an untold story of something heroic, or something positive. I don't know. I'm sure there's those stories out there, but like I'm sorry, I don't really have a good answer. I'm not sure. I guess I just don't want to read about modern events. The world's so bleak. And then second question: pandemic pastime. Is this crowd control? Pandemic pastimes. Is this crowd control? You mean my videos? I don't think there's quite enough people. The crowd's not big enough for my videos to have any control over anybody. And from what I can tell, the crowd, such as it is, isn't being very controlled by the pandemic. So, no, I don't think it is. Thank you very much for the questions, Earl. I appreciate it. And so, Tartan Phantom questions: what's your favorite Archie superhero? Captain Hero, Pure Heart the Powerful, or Evil Heart? Well, I'm actually going to say none of the above. I thought about this for a little bit. And Jughead's my favorite character in Archie, and one of my favorite characters, period, across any medium. I love Jughead. But I think my answer is actually going to be Super Teen, which is Betty's superhero identity, Super Teen. Betty is a character who makes more sense as a superhero to me than the others. I love Jughead, and I like Captain Hero. Of the ones you gave me, I like Captain Hero the best. But even though he has his elements that sort of lend themselves towards being a cool protagonist, he's fundamentally not that motivated. I don't know. Archie's just a clumsy doofus, and Evil Heart's not really a hero, and I don't like Reggie. So, but Betty has that, like, she is heroic. There's a lot of stories where in the comics with her, leading the fight to save the town forest, or clean up the environment, or help the kids at the orphanage and stuff. So Betty as a superhero makes sense to me. Like, that makes sense. So that's my answer. I would say Super Teen is my favorite. Alright, and that's all the questions I have now, but stay tuned, because if I have more questions, there'll be more of this video right now. Okay, I'm back as promised. I've got more questions, and I've also got more answers. So let's just jump right into it. First up, we've got Big Lion Cat 646 asking, what's your first comic book, and where did you get it? So I've talked about this a little bit. The first comic book in comic book form that I read was Black Hawk 269. So where I got it was my parents had joined a bowling league. This was at the beginning of 1984 when I was 10 and a half. They had joined a bowling league, and while they were bowling, they gave me some money so I'd have something to do. And there was a convenience store at the strip mall, and so I went and they had a spinner rack, and I bought a couple comics. And Black Hawk 269 and 270 were the comics that I got, and I had sort of been primed for it. I had read comics, but not in comic book form. So I had read like the comic strips in the paper and collections of those, like the Garfield books, for instance. I had read stuff like the mini comics from Atari Force that came with Atari cartridges. I'd read comic strips in like Dragon magazine. I'd read Mad magazine, so I was familiar with comics, but I never read a comic book. And when I read those Black Hawk issues, something just clicked. I went home and made a checklist, crossed off those 2 issues. I literally the first comic I ever read, I immediately became a collector, and I haven't stopped collecting ever since. 37 years. I just loved it. I loved the form, and absolutely immediate love. So Mark Evanier and Dan Spiegel really hooked me right away. Thanks very much for the question, Big Lion Cat 646. I really appreciate it. Next question, it's Anthony Purdue. Hi, Anthony. Thanks very much for the question. Anthony always has thought-provoking questions, and so let me read this one to you here. What if Namor became an equally popular TV series as Superman before 1956 and Showcase number 4? How do you think Marvel and comic history would have been affected? And then he compares it to Sea Hunt, which is a big show in the 50s that had a similar premise to some of the Bill Evers stories where Namor was investigating sea-based mysteries. So, great question. I've been doing a lot of thinking about this. I actually think it would have changed a lot. If you look at the popular Superman, it helped DC quite a bit. Superman and Batman and Wonder Woman were still being published, and various titles, but it was actually a relatively small part of DC's line, their superhero books. And when the show came out, they expanded that line as a result of the popularity of the show. In 1954, they put out the Jimmy Olsen number 1 came out. In 58, they expanded into Lois Lane after the Showcase tryout. And so the show really was a springboard to keep Superman in the public consciousness as this sort of icon. It helped DC expand their line and get a bigger foothold, and DC is one of the companies that really was behind the comics code because it allowed them to put the thumb down and crush some of their biggest competition. DC was trying to put those other companies out of business. Fawcett, they got rid of Fawcett in 53, but with the comics code they were also able to get rid of Lev Gleason, which is the biggest competition. And so they gave him a lot of leverage, and it gave them a lot of popularity and titles and stuff. I think if Marvel had had a Namor popular at that same time, it would have been huge, because we think of the Silver Age as starting in 56, post-code with Flash, but if you look just 2 years earlier in 54, of course, Atlas tried to do their own revival of superhero books before that, and they brought back Namor the Submariner, they brought back the Human Torch, they brought back Captain America. Those revivals only lasted 3 or 4 issues. But now imagine if, at that time, Namor had a TV series that was as popular as Superman. We've already said that Superman, that same year in 54, was able to expand their line with the new Jimmy Olsen series because Jimmy Olsen was such a popular character on the TV show. I think what happens is we get a very different Marvel universe that starts in 1954 instead of in 1961, because I think the logical thing that you want to do is not only you're going to capitalize on the success of Namor, but you're going to use that to drive the success of the other superhero revivals, right? So Namor, of course, had interacted with these other characters before, fighting against the Human Torch and appearing alongside him and Captain America and the All-Winter Squad. I think they use Namor as a springboard crossing over into these other series. And so we never get the Marvel Universe that we know now because it's not necessary. For Atlas's success, they don't need to reinvent themselves because they have a successful superhero revival in 54. Jack Kirby's not involved because he's still overpriced. So we've got like Joe Maneely, we got Bill Everett drawing some of this stuff. We got people like Russ Heath, and he can bring in some of these artists that he has that are really good from his other titles. And so I think it allows Marvel to become a player. Marvel was doing a lot of horror books at the time. It allows Marvel to shift from horror back into superhero stuff, so the impact of the code is much less on Marvel than it was otherwise. However, I think it actually could have mitigated the effect of the code period, because if you have a superhero boom in 54, right when the Senate hearings and stuff are really getting going, just before the code comes into play, if the industry as a whole, because of market factors, is able to shift away from the series, like the adult content that was bringing them so much trouble, and they shifted their sales into superhero books, which is a safer arena for the most part. Yeah, there's stuff about Batman, it's, whatever, in Seduction of the Innocent, but I mean, stuff that was viewed as stuff for kids, then I think the code doesn't need to be as strict. I think the code is less important and less effective because they don't need to restrict the content because the content is different already. So if they have a successful Silver Age superhero revival that starts in 54, I think we have other companies that may have been saved and not had to go under because they would be able to survive on superhero books. Like Quality, for instance, sold out to DC in 57. Post-code, they couldn't keep up with the sales, but imagine if they were able to do stuff like Doll Man successfully. Maybe they stick around, and a couple other publishers that were doing superhero stuff. So maybe Lev Gleason starts moving back into Daredevil and Crimebuster and Boy Comics. Some of their titles that already had superhero elements to them, and they're able to get away from the crime stuff. It creates a whole different atmosphere if there's a successful superhero revival in 54 driven by something like a Namor TV show. Now again, the Superman show didn't have that effect on things because DC was not interested in helping anybody else. They were trying to crush people. But I think if Atlas is doing this, I think it's different. So it's just some thoughts. I'm curious to see what you think of my speculation there. But thanks very much for the question. I really appreciate it. Okay, Josh Millard. Hi, Josh. Thanks very much for the question. I really appreciate the support. Josh asks, what's your favorite comic book writer from the 1980s? I've done a lot of thinking about this. This is a tricky one for me because a lot of the big writers from the 80s, celebrated 80s writers, I'm not a huge fan of. I'm not a big fan of Frank Miller. I'm not a huge Alan Moore fan. So, Chris Claremont, I'm not a huge fan of. So, my first instinct was to say Mark Gruenwald or Roger Stern, but Gruenwald in particular, at the time, I was a really big fan of a lot of his work. Captain America, DP7 is an underrated series, Squadron Supreme, a lot of good stuff. But actually, I'm going to say Mike Grell, even though he's best known really as an artist. I think that's and he has some great art, but I think his writing in some cases is better than his art. And he did John Sable and then segued into Green Arrow, and I'm a big fan of both of those titles. He also had, before that, right at the beginning of the decade, he was doing work on Warlord. So yeah, I'm going to say Mike Grell is actually my favorite writer of the 80s. So thanks very much for the questions. I really appreciate it. Next question, Mark Knapp, 68. 2 questions. What made you decide to start a YouTube channel? Well, I had a small channel that I was just putting videos for my comic, The Crime Busters, that I make. So when I was doing videos for the Kickstarters, for instance, I would just save them to this YouTube channel just so I'd have a repository of them. But that wasn't really content I was making for myself or for YouTube. It was just a place for me to hold stuff. I really got started because Dratchmere, uh, I'm on the CGC forums, and he had posted a thread where he was showing his videos, specifically his top 50 comics, and there's a couple other people that responded with videos of their top 50. And I had done a video many years ago where I showed off parts of my collection that I had done really for insurance purposes. But I thought it would be a fun way to do that again, is to go through and show off, my favorite books. And I did that, and really just for my own entertainment. And I started getting hundreds and hundreds of views, and I started getting a bunch of subscribers. I wasn't expecting that at all. And I found that I really enjoyed making the videos, so I just kept making more, and people kept watching them. And it's really something that I enjoy a lot. So it just sort of happened, but it's turned out that I've liked it a lot. Second question: what do you think is your biggest improvement you did to your channel? Not sure I've really improved anything since I started. It's kind of the same stuff, to be honest. Yeah, I mean, I guess what I would say is that I'm trying to bring in different types of content, which can be tricky because because of YouTube's algorithms. If I do a video that's different from what my viewers are expecting, and so they don't watch it as much, then YouTube will note that, and it may not suggest my later videos as much. So my videos may stop showing up for people, even if it is the type of content they want. So it's tricky to branch out. But I mean, what I'm trying to do is, I really like talking about the collecting aspect of things, and that's the focus of the channel. But I also really enjoy making comics, and so I'm trying to bring in more stuff with that, and bringing in other creators, other indie creators, to try and just talk about the process of making comics for those who are interested in it, and for my own interest. So, I don't know if that's really an improvement or not, but for me, the whole reason that I enjoy doing it, and enjoy doing it to begin with, is because I'm talking about the stuff that I love about comics. And one thing that I love about comics that I don't get to talk as much about really is making comics, and the experience of becoming a comic publisher and stuff. So as long as I'm making stuff that I'm passionate about, I think people will respond. So yeah, I mean, I will say that people really like the videos where I go to comic stores, and I really like doing those too. I wish I could get more video inside more stores, because that's been limited for various reasons. But adding the store visits has also been an improvement that I think people have liked. So thanks for the question, Mark. I really appreciate it. Next question, the Bruins brothers. I'm wondering what your favorite Lichtenstein source comics are. Okay, people that have watched my channel for a long time know that I'm not a fan of Lichtenstein. I do have a number of his sourced comics because I collect romance, but also I collect war comics, and I do find it interesting. My favorite is All American Men of War '89. The war books are not as valuable as the romance comics, but All American Men of War '89 is the source for 5 or 6 different Lichtenstein works, including Wham, which is one of his probably two most famous pieces of art. It's the only Lichtenstein source that I know of, and I'm not an expert on this, where one of his pieces that he swiped is actually on the cover. I've had several copies of All American Men of War '89 over the years. It's one of those books that I search for whenever I go to comic stores. I look to see if I can get a copy. I've gotten all 4 copies. I've found it at comic stores for under $10, and so I've made a fair amount of money reselling them. But of course, I have one in my own collection as well, so that would probably be my favorite. New World Order comics. My question is, are you a Tenyion fan? That's Tenyion. I don't know what that means. I'm gonna be honest. I googled it. I think there's a typo. It looks like your question was asked on a cell phone, based on some of the other spellings. I don't know if you're asking about Tennyson, like Alfred Lord Tennyson, and I would say I can't really call myself a fan. I studied that stuff when I was an English major in college, and it's okay, but his work wasn't really my style. Um, I have a feeling that's not what your question is, but I'm sorry. I don't actually know what you're asking. So, um, if you want to respond to this, I'll try and do another video. I'm just not sure. Maybe I might be a fan. I don't know. Joe47771 asks, "Could you live a month alone in the forest?" Hi, Joe. Thanks very much. I mean, probably not. You know, the manly macho man that I am, like almost all men, you always think that you can do this stuff. It's always like, oh, I can survive a zombie apocalypse. Or like, if the purge happened and they busted in the front door right now, even though I'm lying here in my underwear, I would be able to flip this table over and use that lamp as a deadly weapon, and I'd be able to kill 6 people with this footstool. But realistically, no. I think if I was left alone in the forest, if I was just myself without anything, without any supplies or anything, I would be in poop. I mean, I have watched a lot of survival TV shows back in the day, not so much now, but I have watched a number of them. I have some very, very rudimentary like camping skills from when I was a child, and we used to go camping and stuff like that. So I understand the concepts of what I should do. Would I be able to do those things? Probably not. A big factor here is what the weather is. So that would be a big determining factor in whether I could survive alone in the forest. If I had good weather for like the first week, I would have a chance. If I have bad weather right at the beginning, I think I'm dead. So, thanks very much for the question and the support. I really appreciate it. Okay, Jim Healy asks, "In another video, you express a dislike for the Hulk, but you give no reasons why. Did your parents make you, as a child, eat green vegetables that finds its expression in your adult hatred for the Hulk?" Unfortunately, my parents did not force me to eat vegetables. They let me eat whatever I wanted, because I was a very picky eater and very stubborn. Very stubborn. They tried, but I just refused. And the result is that I'm terribly out of shape with horrible eating habits. So I wish I had gotten into vegetables as a child. Perhaps if I did, I would love the Hulk. But actually, no, there's nothing to do with that. I find the Hulk. I just don't find him interesting. I think that I understand the basic, Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde sort of thing, and I understand conceptually why people respond to that, particularly kids. The idea you've got this rage monster inside you and whatever. But there's a couple things. First of all, I just inherently am not interested in main characters who are dumb. I like reading about intelligent, clever. I want to read about characters that are smarter than me, right? I don't want to read about morons. And for long stretches of Hulk's publishing history, he's just a moron. Particularly the era that when I was growing up, or just before I was growing up, but in the 70s, where he's basically either a mindless, rage beast, or it's like, he's an absolute idiot. Throughout the 70s in Defenders, with like, where he basically has the intellect and personality of an angry 5-year-old. I just can't stand that. Now, I don't know if that has something to do with the same reasons that I fundamentally dislike child versions of adult characters. but I'm not interested. I just find it obnoxious. Yes, I'm aware that there are other versions of the Hulk, but that's actually another thing that I don't like about the Hulk. To me, it shows the weakness of the core concept, that you have to continually abandon the core concept in order to do stories with the Hulk. So most of the stories of the Hulk are one of two kinds. Um, it's the Hulk, mindless idiot, uh, in random crazy situations. So it's stories that are not about the Hulk. It's the Hulk in a different story. So it's like it's the Hulk in space. It's the Hulk in a medieval society. The Hulk is shrunken down to tiny size, and now he's on a microscopic world. And they're stories that can theoretically illuminate things about the Hulk, but usually the Hulk is just an actor in those stories. So you'll have a story, and the Hulk comes in as a catalyst for these other characters that are in the story, and they change because they can change as a result of the Hulk's presence in the story. But the Hulk doesn't change because, to reiterate and not to put too fine a point on it, he's a moron. So he's not changing, right? And so this Hulk in those stories is a prop. And that's fine if I'm invested in those other stories. But if I'm reading a series of Hulk where you've got 50 issues in a row where it's like 30 different unrelated stories where you drop an angry moron into the mix to see what happens, I'm not interested. The other thing that happens in a lot of Hulk stories is that they have to fundamentally change the point of the Hulk in order to tell a story about the Hulk, right? So it's like, what if? Now it's the Gray Hulk, and so now he's not dumb, but he's like a gangster or something. And now it's like, what if he has the brains of Bruce Banner, so he's the smart Hulk, so he's still got the power of the Hulk, but he's smart. Or what if the Hulk's power is given to a bad guy, and now we've got like the Red Hulk or something. What if, and just bear with me, the Hulk is the bad guy, and now it's World War Hulk. Or maybe we put the Hulk in a Jack Kirby Gladiator story. We just take the Thing out of that whole Fantastic Four storyline where he gets abducted and sent to a space gladiator arena, and we put the Hulk in that, and now we have Planet Hulk, right? And it's just trying to find new versions of the Hulk, because the Hulk himself was played out. Now this happens with lots of different characters, but you can tell all sorts of different stories with Captain America where you don't. Yes, there's been a couple times where he's quit and someone else has become Captain America, but you can tell all sorts of different stories with Captain America, and they're interesting in lots of different ways because the character has different things about him that are interesting. The Hulk has one thing. There's a smart guy, and he has a split personality, and he turns into a big angry dumb guy. And that I feel like the Jekyll and Hyde Frankenstein monster stuff that was baked into the original premise, they kind of played it out by the end of the 60s, and then we've had 50 years of people going, well, everyone likes the Hulk, but we don't have anything to say about him. So we're going to either just use him as a plot point in someone else's story, or we're just going to make up a new version of the Hulk because the old version of the Hulk sucks. So I just, and I don't mind it when the Hulk is used as a plot point in someone else's story. What I don't like in the pages of the Hulk comic is he's supposed to be the main character, yet, and again, I'm talking about Bronze Age books mostly, but nothing happens to him because nothing can happen to him, right? What I like, though, is if it's in the pages of Avengers or Fantastic Four or something like that, bring in the Hulk in as a catalyst to see the main characters that you're actually already invested in because you've been following them, how they react to the Hulk or how the Hulk messes things up or changes things, and they respond to it. That's a lot more interesting to me. something like World War Hulk could have been interesting if it wasn't about the Hulk, it was about the other people. But, I did read that when it came out, and what I remember is that the Hulk was the main character of it, and he was going around whacking everybody. I would much rather have seen that from the point of view of the people that he was going after. Um, so yeah, that's my long-winded thing. I don't mind the Hulk as a secondary character in someone else's title. I also don't necessarily mind the Hulk as a plot device or as an antagonist for someone like the Avengers to fight against. But I find the character himself to be too limited for me to be interesting as the main character in a series. And so as a result, I just don't like him. I've never liked him, and I don't think I ever will. I mean, I'll give him this: he's not a swamp monster, at least. And question 2: are you left-handed or right-handed? I'm right-handed. That probably explains my dislike of the Hulk. Okay, final question is from Anton Bolet. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. If I'm not, I'm going to blame the Hulk. Antoine asks, do you read any European comics, and what are your favorite series? So unfortunately the answer is no. Now, I would like to. The reason that I haven't, it's taken me a long time to figure this out. And it's a dumb reason, because I've seen bits and pieces of different European comics, and they look fantastic, right? And I would love to read some of the stories, and at some point I will. But I've realized over the last few years that the format does make a big difference to me. I don't like reading digital comics at all. I like physical. And I prefer the old-fashioned floppies. I prefer the individual issues to a collected trade. And that's a problem with the European comics, because I can't read the individual issues. Even if I could get them, I can't really read them now, and a lot of them were made as trades, but it's just the format thing really is what's sort of kept me from really getting into it, is because it just it's just not how I read comics. So at some point I'm hoping to get over that and just get more into the trade collections, because there's a lot of European comics I think I would really like. I want to read stuff like Lieutenant Blueberry, Corto Maltese, but Lieutenant Blueberry is one I would probably start with. I like westerns and stuff. So yeah, but for now, no. I'm afraid I don't read any, and I don't collect any, so I don't have a favorite series. So that's it. Thanks very much for all the questions. I really appreciate it. When I get the 500 subscribers at some point in the distant future, then we'll do this again. So start thinking up your questions. You can ask me your follow-ups. Try and convince me why the Hulk is cool, or why swamp monsters are neat. And why I will probably not agree with you, but curious to see your thoughts on all of my stuff below. Lot to talk about. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Thanks again, everybody. I really appreciate it.